Good evening, everyone. My name is Brandon Woodard. I have the privilege of working here as the Director of Intercultural and International Student Services. Courtesy of my colleague, Linda Bruner, when we had lunch today, she reminded me to do something that I had forgotten to do, which is share my pronouns. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I've had the opportunity and the pleasure of working, or not working, but hanging around with our speaker this evening for quite a while. Today, listening to his words of wisdom and all that he has to share, he's got a sense of humor. I mean, not that wasn't something that you would expect him to have, but it's like, the work of restorative justice is serious stuff, and he's got a sense of humor, which is kind of cool. So, cool dude. What I also find fascinating about him is his humility in doing this work and how he thinks of himself in this work. What you all may not know is that he is a prolific writer, and he's frequently quoted and referenced when people talk about restorative justice. So I'm going to give you a quick bio, then I'm going to turn it over to him so we can get started. David Karp is a professor and director of the Center for Restorative Justice and the School of Leadership and Education Sciences at the University of San Diego. Interestingly enough, he just shared with us, and I knew this though, but he'd been at Skidmore College out east for 21 years. And so now he's out in sunny California. A little bit of a transition.
That's no joke.
Seriously, I can believe you on that one. His current scholarship focuses on restorative justice in community and educational settings. For his work on campus restorative justice, he was the recipient of the 2019 Leadership and Innovation Award from the National Association of Community and Restorative Justice, as well as the 2011 Donald D. Gehring Award from the Association for Student Conduct Administration. So what you'll find over the course, I believe, of his presentation is you'll find how restorative justice can actually be used here on our campuses. And we are looking for student input to make that happen. So if you're really inspired by a class that you're taking with Professor Pagnuco or Armajani, please find me. David has also published more than 100 academic papers and 6 books, including the Little Book of Restorative Justice for colleges and universities. I have the original copy, and probably about 3 weeks ago, I got the second edition. I'm not going to read the second edition. Don't take it personally. I'm still getting through the first one. In addition to that, he also has written Wounds That Do Not Bind, Victim-Based Perspectives on the Death Penalty, and the Community Justice Ideal. David serves on the board of directors for the National Association for Community and Restorative Justice, and he has previously served as Associate Dean of Student Affairs and Professor of Sociology at Skidmore College. He received his BA in Peace and Conflict Studies from the University of California, Berkeley, and it's an amazing story if you ever hear him tell that, and his PhD in Sociology from the University of Washington. Please give a Benedictine welcome to Dr. David Karp.
Yeah, that was super nice. Thank you. Okay, good evening, everybody. I don't know why you're not out enjoying the sunshine right now and coming here, but I appreciate you coming out. So I want to just talk about restorative justice on campuses and how that works, and I'll do that primarily through some different stories. So the first story I want to tell is about a student I knew many years ago at Skidmore. His name was Sam. He's not actually in this picture, but he could have been. And by talking about this story, I really want to talk about what restorative justice is. And the first and main point I want to make is that restorative justice is often thought of as a particular practice or program, but it's really more of a philosophy. And so I hope that's captured in the story. So I don't know how it is here, but Skidmore is a very similar college to your two. It's small. There's about 2,700 students. It was originally founded as a women's college in the 1920s and became co-ed in the 1980s. One of the consequences of it being a historically women's college is that it doesn't have a strong sports history. So when we think about school spirit, we usually think about people coming out to games in major ways. At our games, the teams are happy if there are about this many people in the stands. It's, lots of empty seats, and it's a little bit demoralizing for our teams. This is actually a picture from a Skidmore event, and it's a moment. Skidmore must have done something right in this moment. There's a lot of energy in this picture, and kind of a lot of male testosterone in this picture. When I picture the incident that Sam was involved in, it's this image that comes to mind. Sam, I knew because he had actually taken a class with me, and then about a year later, he got in trouble. Sam had come to Skidmore and played on our basketball team. And unfortunately, Sam was not our best student. And if you can't maintain the right grade point average, you get put on academic probation. And one of the consequences of that is that you can't play on a team anymore. So he was off the team during this academic trial period, and that's in some ways unfortunate because sports were his lifeline, and so even though he wasn't able to play, he was a fan. I always think of him as Sam the fan. Sam's like one of those guys just cheering on teams, and it wasn't just basketball. It could be women's soccer, lacrosse, tennis. It didn't matter. He was at games all the time, cheering them on. And this was, particularly relevant for our campus where not that many people would come out to games. So there was an event, and there was a moment like this where Skidmore was doing well. Halftime occurs. Sam gets into a little bit of a confrontation with a member of the opposing team. It was actually a student manager for the opposing team. It was kind of I think of it like a chest-thumping moment, like he's all proud and happy that our team is doing well, and he's going to get it in the other team's face and say how good we are and how bad they are. And so it's evolving quickly into a fight, into a physical fight. Luckily, there was one of the assistant coaches saw this and intervened, and then he was ejected from the event. And then, per Skidmore protocol, he was prohibited from attending any athletic events, and then he was referred to our conduct office for disciplinary response, getting into a fight. Turns out he had also been drinking with his friends, so that's another no-no according to the conduct policy. And so it was referred to our restorative justice program. And I met with Sam, and I said I knew him, and and I was able to talk to him and find out what he was thinking, and see whether he was remorseful, which he was. And then as a restorative justice facilitator in this case, it's my job to figure out first if we should go forward with the restorative process and who should I invite. So I extended an invitation to that student from that other school. That student decided not to come, mostly because that school was about a 3-hour drive. So he really didn't want to drive 6 hours just to attend this, from his perspective, this goofball's disciplinary process. But he wrote in a little letter of kind of an impact statement. And then I I talked to our athletic director and our assistant athletic director. Her name was Megan, and Megan really caught my attention because Megan said to me that she knew Sam, that she felt very badly, professionally badly. She made a bad professional judgment because she saw Sam come into the gym with his friends, 5 or 6 friends. She could tell that they were all really drunk, and she had to make a split-second decision. Do I stop these guys from coming in, or and send them on their way, or do I let them in? And she went back and forth in her head because she wanted their raw energy like that at the game, but she didn't want his drunken energy. And so she let it go. She let him in. It was obviously a mistake. And so what she said is that she really wanted to talk to Sam about this. And that's a restorative justice moment, is when someone who's been impacted by harmful misconduct gets to tell their story and what mattered to them. And so in this dialogue that I hosted, there were a couple of other people there, but it was really a dialogue between Sam and Megan. She was able to say to him, I know why you go to these games, and I know how important they are to you. And he's been banned at this point. But I want to tell you how unacceptable that was, and how much that affected me professionally. And made me question my own judgment, and so I was torn in this moment. So that was an interesting chance for Sam to hear about the impact on this person's professional life, and out of that, the questions are: what do you do? Like, what do you do now? What's the next step? Do we suspend him? Do we prevent him from participating in any other athletic events? And we turn to Megan first and say, what would work for you? And she said that her primary concern was around this problem that she defined as the movement from cheering to jeering. That when crowds get unruly, they're no longer a positive influence on the team. They're more antagonistic towards the other teams, and things get hostile and aggressive, and fights can occur, and it's not good. So she was concerned about their drinking, and she was concerned about how he and his friends would often cross that line. And what she said was, more than anything else, she wanted their positive energy. In fact, she felt like she needed it. Like she needed what they brought to games, or that she believed the teams needed the positive energy that they brought, and she didn't want to lose that. But she wanted them to behave responsibly. And she proposed, and she coined this term, this position designation on the spot. She said, what I want is for you to be a student ambassador at our games. And what that means is you will be responsible for leading cheers, for making sure your friends and others stay in line, and that will give you a space, like a role to play. And she said, and by the way, before every game, you need to stop by me, and I'm going to be doing a little breath test to make sure that you're sober and ready to participate. So as long as you're sober and appropriate, this is what I want you to do. And he lit up at this opportunity. He went from fearing that he would get suspended to this opportunity that he didn't know could exist, this kind of leadership opportunity. And I, who, like others, Skidmore people didn't go to many games, I said, it's only there aren't that many weeks left in the semester, and this was spring semester. just how many games can he attend in this role? I mean, is this meaningful? And then she just did like this little wheels turning, and she said, 47. I was like, really? There are like 47 athletic games between now and the end of the semester? And she said, yeah. And so then they negotiated what the right number was, which was for them 15, so that he would go to these 15 events. And so it was a success. That was his role. He leaned into it in a good way. His friends were appropriate for the rest of his time. He graduated, and I don't know this, but I think that his academic success ultimately was tied to this connection that he had. So I thought that was a pretty cool story, and I think it captures, what's up here, that there is this aspiration in restorative justice for creating positive relationships. This was not a positive relationship that they had before. It was a relationship. It was a relationship she tolerated because instrumentally it was important to her, but it was not a positive relationship. It's a model that doesn't say forgive and forget. Like, oh, well, we'll just ignore the misconduct. There is accountability to it. There are obligations. He had to deliver on his end of the bargain. The thing she was concerned about, him and his friends drinking at games and being abusive, was the thing that he needed to prove himself by not doing anymore. And a relationship based on mutual recognition, dignity, and respect. That the mutual recognition is that she saw him for what he could do, and he saw her for the role that she played and what she was trying to achieve with her athletic program. So I thought it was a good example of a restorative process. And so another way of thinking about this is that we have two ways we think about justice. There is the accountability side. We want to hold people accountable. And the way we hold them accountable is that we punish them, right? So if they do something small, we punish them a little, right? And if they do something large and serious and harmful, we punish them a lot. And so we know that we've held them accountable by the amount of punishment we deliver. On the other hand, there's this concept of rehabilitation, which is about being supportive. And we say, okay, Sam's having trouble. How can we help him? What does he need? Does he need academic support? Maybe he's getting in trouble because he's academically insecure. And maybe he's got an undiagnosed learning disability. Let's figure out the problem and make sure that he can succeed academically. That's support. Usually in our society, we pick sides. Or we do a pendulum swing, and our society floats from, yes, let's punish, to no, punishment's bad, let's do rehabilitation and help people. And restorative justice says, in a sense, both are good, that holding people accountable for the harm that they cause is important, but also so is social support, helping people succeed when they're in trouble. And so why not try to do both? How can we hold Sam accountable, but also support him to be successful? That's always the question that we try to achieve. So I want to share a couple of definitions of restorative justice. This one I'll let you watch and introduce this person, Fania Davis. She is one of the leaders in the restorative justice movement right now in the United States. She founded an organization called Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth and has worked primarily in bringing restorative justice to Oakland schools and has well, you mentioned my little book of restorative justice for colleges and universities. She has just this year published a book called The Little Book of Restorative Justice for race and healing, or some, I forget the exact title, but it's about race. It's focused on race. Anyway, so let's hear her take on restorative justice.
What I mean by justice is very close to what Dr. King means by justice. In 1955, right around the time that Rosa Parks was arrested, there was a mass meeting of the Montgomery Improvement Association in a church in Montgomery. And he offered this definition of justice. Justice is love, correcting that which stands against love. Or justice is love, correcting that which revolts against love. Ours is a justice system that harms people who harm people to show that harming people is wrong. And so our system just replicates that harm. And from him, I learned there was this thing called restorative justice, that instead of perpetuating that endless cycle of harm, it seeks to interrupt it. It seeks to heal the harm, repair the damage that's done to relationships. It's a justice that seeks to create more social peace than social conflict. I learned as a civil rights trial lawyer that my clients, even when we won close to $1 million in damages for discrimination, they were more broken after going through the trial process. Their relationship with their employer was even worse. So I learned personally that ours is a system that creates more social conflict, that hurts relationships more than it helps them. Restorative justice seeks to flip that.
And
Fanya's work, is primarily with Oakland, which is predominantly African American, poor, and has embraced restorative justice fully. One of the things that we often hear from school districts is that they would like to do restorative justice, but they don't have the resources or time to invest in restorative practices. We also hear that on college campuses. And the work in Oakland is a very clear demonstration of how a school district with a clear vision for restorative justice can do it, and do it really well, even without the financial resources. So restorative justice, in general, the contemporary restorative justice movement has began in criminal justice and in juvenile justice, and as it's gained traction there, there's been increasing interest across other social institutions. So we've seen it spread to K through 12 schools, colleges, workplaces, and even families. I was just talking to somebody the other day in San Diego who runs restorative parenting workshops, because of course kids get in trouble at home, and so rethinking how parents discipline kids. Also, restorative justice is applied to large-scale harms, genocide, human rights violations, historical harms. The image there is of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. So how do you address harms at scales like that, like apartheid or genocide? So it's a very big global social movement right now, restorative justice. A little hard to pin down exactly what it is because there's so many different ways of talking about it and applications of it. One of the pioneers in contemporary restorative justice is Howard Zehr. He was a recently retired professor at Eastern Mennonite University in Virginia. Howard created the first official restorative justice program in the United States in the 1970s in Indiana. And he's written really beautifully about restorative justice. And so his definition is captured here. It's a process to involve, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in a specific offense, and to collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and put things as right as possible. So it's aspirational. It doesn't say, yes, we will repair all harms. It just says, let's try. Let's see what we can do. Let's see what people's needs are. Let's identify what people's obligations are and see what we can come up with when we gather people together. So I wanted to say a few words about the relationship between Catholic social teaching and restorative justice. I don't have a deep history in this, so I want to just mention a couple things. One is that there was this statement issued in 2000 about criminal justice. The title of this document is Responsibility, Reintegration, and Restoration, a Catholic Perspective on Crime and Criminal Justice. And so you can tell from the title, restorative justice is woven throughout. And I think it's kind of an interesting little history, and I hope I have it accurately, because it says something about the role that Catholic campuses play in this. So Regis University hosted this very official U.S. Bishops Committee that was going to be wrestling with creating a statement on criminal justice. And at that meeting, this guy, Father Michael Bryant, gave a presentation about restorative justice to these bishops. And what he did was he shared the work of Howard Zare and the work that had been Howard had accomplished in Indiana, and the work, the writings that he had done since. And as a result of that, restorative justice became woven throughout this document. So one example is just this quote from this statement: "A Catholic approach leads us to encourage models of restorative justice that seek to address crime in terms of the harm done to victims and communities, not simply as a violation of the law." So that's pretty cool. And the other thing I wanted to just say quickly is that there are some markers of Catholic social teaching that come up again and again as indicators of what it's all about. And those are tied pretty clearly, I think, to some fundamental restorative justice principles. So I wanted to go over those. So one is the idea of a preferential option for the vulnerable. And from a restorative justice perspective, that really means focusing on the harms and the needs of people who are vulnerable. That could mean crime victims, but also the needs of offenders. And that's tied to the second one, the dignity of the person. And so the tagline, I haven't really figured out the right way to say this, but I said manifesting the story. And what this means is creating space for people to tell their story is a way to provide them dignity. Letting Sam tell his story is a way of giving him dignity. Letting Megan, the athletic director, tell her story is a way to give her dignity. Rights and responsibilities is related to the aspirations of dealing with both individual and communal obligations. So in a sense, there are obligations in my story that Sam has, but there are also obligations of the community, in this case, maybe to support Sam, create a leadership opportunity for him, check in with him, and make sure he's sober, offer support, maybe even rethink how people enter athletic events. There was another case, a story, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but it involved students who got drunk, lost their keys to their residence halls, and would climb through first floor windows to get back in to their rooms. It was a problem solving. But sometimes they wouldn't be crawling through their own rooms. They would scare people, right? You suddenly have a guy in your room and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? So the person who climbs through the window is responsible for their misconduct. But at some point we ask, why does Skidmore have windows that you can so easily climb through? First floor, like, that's not safe. Why do students have to live in rooms with these? Skidmore, like here, it gets cold and the windows are usually closed, but not all year round. So there are institutional obligations as well to make sure that people are safe. And moments like those incidents remind the institution that they have obligations as well. Participation and subsidiarity are related concepts, that people should be able to participate. And subsidiary is this idea that the people closest to the issue should have some voice and in this participation. And so the idea that we would include Sam and Megan in the decision-making process and not just issue a finding and a sanction from above is a principle that's captured here, that they have a stake in this and their ideas for solution matter. And finally, the idea of promoting the common good. There is in our work, there's a law professor, her name is Jennifer Llewellyn in Canada, who says that if every restorative justice dialogue, individual incident and process is a microcosm of larger social issues. And so if that process only addresses the small issue in the moment, like I broke Brandon's phone, I should pay for it, right? That solves our thing. But the fact that, I'm making this up now, that Brandon can't afford to buy a new phone on his own speaks to something about money in our society and how wealth is distributed. And so we should also be thinking about, why is it difficult for people to buy phones? And so what is something that could be done to address that as well? So I want to share a little bit about, does restorative justice work? And I want to share the findings of a study and share another story. And so this is about a program also in Oakland. It's not Fania Davis's program. Oakland's a little epicenter for the work. There's another organization that does great work. And I'm going to feature this particular study by a woman named Sujatha Baliga, and I'll mention more about her in a moment. But what they did was that they decided they were going to create a restorative justice program for felony level youth crime. And so the idea started in 2008. The caseload, as you can see here, is pretty serious, right? Robberies, burglaries, car theft, assault, drug sales, dating violence, sexual assault, arson. These are not small. These are not small crimes. So 62% of the restorative conferences involve felony level crime. So this is the program I'm referring to. And I'm going to show you another clip. This is Sujatha. She's going to share a story about one case in this program. And I'm particularly excited to share this clip right now because about 2 weeks ago, Sujatha was awarded the MacArthur Genius Award. And if people haven't heard of that, it's one of the most prestigious awards you could ever get. And it's not officially called the Genius Award, but that's what people call it because you got to be one to get it, basically. So Sujatha got it for her work on restorative justice around this issue and others. So let's hear her tell this story.
We received a case about a stolen car, and we reached out to the young person, and he pretty quickly took responsibility for it, and was very open to meeting with his victim and making it right, and explained that he was really poor, but he was willing to get a job and try to figure out, how to do right by the victim. So we reached out to the victim, and the victim was extremely unhappy that the case had been diverted. She actually knew a little bit about diversion because she worked for a law enforcement type entity, and was adamant that she had been out of pocket $4,000 in costs because of this car, and wanted to see $4,000. And so in meeting with the young person and his family, his mother is undocumented, working multiple jobs. They were living in the most in the kinds of poverty that we just shouldn't have in the United States, with so many other people's children living with them just to have a place to eat. And I knew that this mother and this young man were not coming up with $4,000. And so the person I was training at the time asked me, so are we going to send the case back? Because there's no way this woman's getting what she wants. So I go back to her and I say, would you have any interest in doing this even if $4,000 might not be the outcome? Is there some other reason to do this? And she'd brought a friend with her that day, and he said, I would really love for you to move forward. And she said, I would just want to meet with this kid and tell him that what he did wasn't okay. And her friend said, I really, really like to meet with this young man too. And so on the day of the conference, it was very powerful. Her supporter, the person who would come with her, at one point, as the youth who'd stolen the car couldn't remember what color the car was, and it became evident that he'd stolen many cars, and the victim is getting angrier and angrier, and you're never going to learn your lesson. And at this point, her friend leans in and he says, I know you. And my heart stopped, because I was like, oh, we usually research these things better, and I had no idea there was a pre-existing relationship between these two parties. And he says, I know you because I used to be you. And he proceeds to tell the most powerful story about how he himself got caught up in stealing cars, and it derailed his life, and how he got his life back on track. And it was as if the rest of the room disappeared, and this young man and this man who turned his life around engaged in a dialogue about how does one turn one's life around. And he says, you have to stop hanging out with your homies in the way that you used to, but don't cut them out of your heart. Just don't include them in every aspect of your life. So you show up for the baptism, but you don't stay for the after party, right? And you always say, I got to get to work, and they respect that. So what makes you happy? What do you believe in, about yourself? Or what are you good at? And the kid puffs up and he says, I'm a really good artist. And his mother starts laughing. And she says, you can't pay this woman back $4,000 with your art. And just then the victim jumps in and she says, oh, yes, he can. Yes, he can, actually. She was so moved by this dialogue, right, that she says, if he paints me a Tinkerbell as tall as I am, it's like she's about 5 feet tall, as tall as I am, I'll forgive all the debt. And we're all looking at each other like, a Tinkerbell? I'm sorry, did she say Tinkerbell? So I start taking notes, and she's describing the exact Tinkerbell and what color the Tinkerbell needed to be, and it had to be an old school one without too much cleavage, so she's very particular about the Tinkerbell. And the kid is really excited, but he's also like, I don't know how I would canvas and what she's describing. And I'm like, we'll find you a community artist person who will help you with this. And so I was thinking of my friend Evan, who I knew would definitely be interested in doing this. And so ultimately the young man does paint this. He just, within a few weeks, he got a job, he raised enough money for all the art supplies. He wanted to do it himself. Painted the most amazing rendition of Tinkerbell on canvas, and the victim asked him to bring it to her home and help him install it, And then he ended up getting involved with other community art projects, and actually getting involved with the program at Community Works, where he had been involved in this case, and just helping out other kids who'd gotten in trouble. So his life turned around completely, and he stayed out of trouble consistently after that. And the Tinkerbell was really beautiful. But I think what's really, when people ask what do victims want, it's different in every case. And I always think you never know, it might be Tinkerbell. Like, you have no idea what is going to leave a crime victim satisfied. So some people might say, oh, that's soft on crime. He stole a car and he gets to paint something. But if that's what the victim wanted, and that's what keeps him out of trouble for the rest of his life, then we should be really happy about Tinkerbell.
So Sujatha sent me the photo of the Tinkerbell. This is it. This is the one he painted, which is pretty cool. This is the story of that program in data. So the recidivism rate for youth, again, this is felony level cases, who go through conferencing is 20% at 18 months and 37% for their matched peers, their control group peers. So it cuts the recidivism rate in about half. And then on the right is the victim satisfaction, whether they think the plan addresses harm, whether they thought the conference was meaningful, whether they thought the conference was fair. And as you can see, there's just very, very, very high victim satisfaction rates for this program. So that's all pretty cool. So a little bit about campus work. The way we think about campus restorative justice is similar to how it's talked about in K through 12 schools. And there are 3 tiers of practice. And so the first tier is meant for everybody. Everybody in this room, faculty, staff, students, anybody who's part of the community would be involved in restorative circles, community building circles. And these are designed to build and strengthen relationships. And that is, we can't really address the hard stuff unless we're in relationship with each other. And what we don't have in our world right now are very good communication skills. And part of that is about texting our way through problems, and part of it is that we're all just generally conflict averse, and we don't have many opportunities to have difficult conversations with people. So we just need practice. And some of that practice is actually the good stuff. Like, let's just talk about good things in our lives. And sometimes it's practice just talking about what's hard in our lives. And then sometimes it's about problem solving, like what's difficult and what would be a good idea? How could we be helpful here? Let's come up with solutions together. And then there's the next level, restorative conferences. That's what Sujatha was just talking about. What I talked about with Sam is, what do we do when someone does cause harm? How do we gather people when they're in a relationship between a harm party and a person who's caused harm? And then finally, there's on campuses the problem of what do we do when people are coming back when they've done something serious enough that they've been separated, they've been suspended, let's say for a year, and they're coming back to campus. How do we restoratively bring them back so that they're supported and the community is reassured that they're okay? So just from the beginning, I wanted to start with the tier 1 community building. These are the reasons we do this: to build community, strengthen relationships, to create a safe container for difficult dialogue, to voice harms and concerns in the community, to collaborate on next steps for response. And the picture is from UC Berkeley. This is a group of students gathered to talk about sexual harm and sexual consent. And so there are, of course, policies that say you're not allowed to do this, and you'll get in trouble if you do, and here are the consequences. But not many people like to sit and read codes of conduct. And I don't know what you do on this campus, but there are usually educational programs that go over what the rules are. But what this is something different. This is a group of students sitting together, setting their own expectations for each other, saying, what does consent mean to you? This is my expectation for consent. Let's talk about alcohol and sex. Let's talk about hookup culture. Let's talk about what's real for us in our community, in our lives at this time, and then say, this is what I expect from my peers. So it's a very intimate and often hard conversation. So that's what we do at Tier 1. And then for Tier 2 restorative conferences, I want to give another example. I'll tell this one quickly, as quickly as I can. So I had another student. His name was Henry. He was an international student, and he was taking classes in the summer, and he was invited to a barbecue. And he went to Walmart with a friend and to pick up the supplies. And they found themselves in the gun section of Walmart, and I think Walmart recently decided it's not selling guns anymore. But this was just a few years ago when they sold them, and they became enamored by this particular gun. It's a BB gun, and it was $29. It was cheap, so he bought one, and then on the way to campus, he took it out of its package and loaded it up with BBs, and then he got to campus, and he was, like your campus is, it's a leafy, wooded kind of space, and he was trying it out. Arm out the window, shooting at trees, not at people, just playing with his new toy. But for everybody else who was on campus, when you see a car driving around with something like that, with an arm out the window, that you don't think toy, not in our era. So 911 calls to campus safety are rolling in, and he was arrested. And what we do, and probably I don't know what would happen here, but when it's a weapons violation, you get put on interim suspension until things get figured out. And during this period, I organized a restorative justice conference. So these are the stages. First, you figure out if this is an appropriate case, what's going on. You help the parties understand the process. You find out who harmed parties are. And then there's the conference where you let people tell their stories. You identify what the harms are. You find solutions. And then after the conference, you help them succeed, just like with Sam. So there are many kinds of harms that we talk about in restorative justice. There are emotional harms and spiritual harms. There are material harms that could be financial or physical harms, like someone's got a broken nose. There's community harms or relationship harms, and also what we call inflamed structural and historical harms. That is, we often talk about microaggressions on campuses. And then people say, well, micro, like what's the big deal? It's micro. But what it is that it's inflaming these historical harms, so that even though an incident someone might shrug at, what it does is it calls attention to a history of harms. It reminds, it inflames. And so it just reawakens an historical trauma. So I thought about Henry and his case in particular, and what we do in the restorative process kind of mechanically. So one harm was that he caused a lot of fear, right? People were freaking out, like there's a shooter on campus. And what people needed was for him to acknowledge that he had caused that harm and to apologize for causing that harm. He also, because he was an international student, he said, which was an interesting moment in the conference, he said, I do not understand this place. I come from another country. Everybody's obsessed with the Second Amendment. You can buy a gun at Walmart. The second I buy a toy gun, I get arrested for it, and I'm in trouble in school. Like, what is going on in this country? I don't get it. And so I say disoriented international students because we do orientation for international students, and our gun culture is not, and rules and so forth, was not part of the orientation. So what he needed was clarity. What international students needed was clarity. And what he proposed was that he do a workshop for our International Student Union, our student club, to educate them about what was permissible and on campus and in the community. And then structurally, of course, people were frightened because there are real shootings that happen all the time. And so it's part of our social structure right now, gun violence. And so what people need is safety from that. And so what he also agreed to do out of this was to do a gun safety campaign, basically educate the campus about gun violence in America. So these are the kinds of solutions that come out once we identify what the clear needs are. And then last, I want to talk about Tier 3, which is about reintegration. And I want to mention another Skidmore incident. So this picture was taken a few years ago. It's a protest, looks kind of like a protest. There was a student at Skidmore who was suspended for sexual misconduct. And what suspension meant was that he had to go away for a year and then come back after that year. And at the process at Skidmore is that there's a re-entry hearing. This is not a restorative justice process. It's just a formal hearing process where a committee decides whether he can come back after the year. Has he done what he's supposed to do while he was suspended? And they make the judgment call. Students got wind of the fact that this hearing was happening, and they wanted to convey their message to the committee about what they wanted to have happen. And that's pretty clear. They were saying to the committee, do not let this person back. What they really wanted to do was they tried to figure out where the hearing was on campus, and they thought it was basically in this area, so that this student, when he came back, would have to go through the crowd, kind of like a gauntlet, to intimidate him. And it was actually very effective because he caught wind of this whole thing and then chose not to even come to the hearing and didn't come back to campus. So the lesson I got from this is that return from suspension is fraught. And it means that the student coming back is nervous about whether they can come back and be successful and accepted, and that the community can be quite angry and fearful about their return. And so how do you manage that restoratively? And so there's this model called circles of support and accountability. It's represented by this graphic. And so there's an inner circle of volunteers who meet with the student on a very regular basis to provide support for that student. And then there's an outer ring of professionals who support the inner ring of volunteers. So if you've got something serious like sexual misconduct, you want to have counselors, people who know about this sort of thing, that the volunteers can say, hey, I'm worried about this thing that this person said. So they have someone to check in with. There are also liaisons to the harmed party, the victim, and the victim's community to say, look, we're on this. We're paying close attention. So it's providing reassurance to the broader community that this is being attended to while also supporting the student to come back successfully. So it's an interesting new model with some good amount of success. And I think that's it for what I want to share with you. And the last thing I just want to say is, what's going to happen here on your two campuses going forward. And I got recently a fortune cookie that had this. So I'm going to say, maybe you could have some momentum here if you choose. But I would be curious to hear your thoughts about that. So I think we have a little time for Q&A, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Yes. Davis mentioned that the Oakland schools said they couldn't afford to implement this. Is there a cost analysis of implementing restorative justice versus, it costs something to have just a simple justice program in any campus or school.
Yeah, it depends on who you ask. Like, for example, there was a study in England which does a lot more restorative justice than we do, and the cost savings by implementing restorative justice were huge, because if you prevent a crime through restorative justice process, you save all that, incarceration cost and victim cost and so forth. But it still requires investment in creating the program first. So there's always this first hurdle of let's invest in this and hope that it will save money later. I've heard similar things, but I haven't seen data on campuses. Every campus has a general counsel. This is really more for students, right? So there's lawyers that work for the campus. So if somebody decides they don't like how they're treated on campus, they can sue the university, and then the university has lawyers to try and make sure that the college doesn't go bankrupt in the process. Lawyers are expensive. I heard a story from my friend Josh Bacon at James Madison University in Virginia, where he had two very similar cases. Both were physical fights, assaults. And one of them went the very traditional route: lawyers, hearing process, preparation, all this, hours and hours and hours, thousands. He calculated about $10,000 for that case. And then he had another one, and he said, I'm just going to do this one restoratively. And it was like him bringing the two people together, a couple of support people, a couple of hours of time, some prep time, and so forth. There was really no money involved. So, if you can avoid litigation, you save money. For Oakland, what they do in the schools is they hire restorative justice coordinators. So those are people with salaries. They don't make a lot of money, help facilitate these processes. And then there's training. And so you have to pay trainers to come and train you. There's work and maybe changing policies. So there's investment. But if all goes well, the investment yields rewards later. And so there's financial reasons to do this, but really, I think the ethical reasons are maybe more compelling. Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, I have two questions as ex-Buddhist, ex-Christian, current Catholic. So I'm pretty pleased to you compared with the Catholic value and the restorative justice. So do you know any kind of approach from the ecumenical interreligious kind of approach toward that peacemaking? For example, I have known some of a parish-based approach and initiative which is called the Peacemaker from the Christian churches. So those kids from the K to 12, most of those kids are youth-based kind of a peaceful dialogue initiative from the local parishes, which is done. So that's really when you compare some of the Catholic value, when it comes to some of the other ecumenical, whether it's Christian, Calvin, or Islamic, some of the compassion for Buddhism too. So do you have any kind of ideas of initiative? And my second question is, when it comes to the kind of mass shooting on campus, so do you have any ideas to apply your ideas of tier 2 or tier 3? Not just a dialogue about kind of gun control, but also some of our more creative ideas to with the funnel with the restorative justice.
Yeah, great. Those are great questions. So the first about, kind of interfaith or different religious perspectives. There's some good books on this topic. Basically, every faith tradition, every culture has a restorative angle, to share. And so we were talking earlier about, pronounce it for me again, Jurgas, yeah, in Islamic traditions. I'm Jewish, and so for example, in Judaism, there's this idea that if someone has harmed you and they ask you for forgiveness, they basically get 3 chances. So if they say, will you please forgive me for this? You're allowed to say no. And so, you say no, and then say you harmed me. Let's say we're back to, okay, so in this case, you stole my iPhone and I'm harmed. And then you say, hey, can you just forgive me? And I'm like, well, no, because I don't have a phone and I'm still mad at you. And then Brandon goes away for a while, and then he comes back and he pays me back. And he says, I gave you the money. Can you please forgive me? I'm allowed to say no again because I'm still mad. Even though I got the money, I don't trust him. Like, you're going to steal my car next. Like, what's the deal here? So he goes away and he comes back and he said, look, the reason I stole your phone was I got this I know he says he told me today that he never drinks. He's never drunk alcohol. So in this case, he's now an alcoholic. And so he's got this drinking problem. And he said, look, I stole your phone because I've got this drinking problem and I act out when I'm drinking. And but I've gone into therapy and I've got a handle and I'm managing my drinking, and I can assure you that this is not going to be a problem again. And so at this point in Jewish law, you're supposed to say yes, right? Like forgiveness 3 times. So every culture's got their way, and I think it's a fascinating thing to consider different ways to gather traditions or honor people's traditions around this. So that was your first question. Your second question was about mass shootings on campuses. So I think one of the things that I didn't talk about was healing circles. So in the aftermath of tragedy, whether it happens on campus or in the world, there's tremendous opportunity to gather people just to process, right? So we sit in circle, we pass a talking piece around, and we say, this is what this is like for me. Like, for example, I now live in California. My mom lives in Santa Rosa, California. 2 years ago now, Santa Rosa had one of those major wildfires. There were about 10,000 homes that got burned down in that. They got within a mile of her house. We were really freaked out about this. So this one was personal. The restorative organization in Santa Rosa, organized about 400 circles in schools. And so they just created the space for kids to tell their stories, you know, like, where were you? What happened? Did you lose your home? Where are you living now? So that they could just talk to each other. So I think opportunities for healing circles are really important in around these big national events. We got a big election coming next year, thinking about circles to talk through like the anxiety coming up in anticipation of it, the polarization around different political perspectives, creating spaces for safe dialogue, I think could be really important around these big events.
Yeah, I was going to mention that this Restorative Justice Center at the University of Minnesota has a program with the Somali community.
Yeah.
And they produce some material on restorative justice and Islam. So there's a real practical connection that's made there.
Yeah, and they're a good resource. So one of the sad things is that Mark Umbright, who's one of the pioneers of restorative justice, he's in the School of Social Work and he runs the Center for Restorative Justice and Peacemaking, is on the verge of retirement. And so that center is actually now migrating to the Duluth campus. I don't know, is that closer to here or further? Further away, okay. So anyway, there's still actually Emily Gardner is a sociology professor who's now going to be running the center. So the resources will continue, but it's a passing of the torch for one of our important pioneers, Mark Umbright. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.